So Steve, your childhood was different than most. Tell us what it was like growing up for you.
I grew up with a hip disease called Legg-Perthes. The way Legg-Perthes works is the first year your hip kind of deteriorates. Then the second year you have to be kept in like a brace to kind of keep it in place. And then the third year it kind of regrows and forms back in. One of the big problems with me, I was very young when I got it. Most kids weren't around like 11, 13. I was 3.
Wow.
The other major thing that happened with it is I was misdiagnosed as a spina bifida issue, which is more spine issues, and the surgery that took place was a botched surgery and never should have been done. So now I have multiple issues going on. But the main issue with Legg-Perthes was I had to keep my hips at an 80-degree angle. So these leg braces that were made were meant to keep my legs in this shape all the time. So the way the braces work came up with these shoes, and then it would be bars on the inside and bars on the outside, and then a bar connecting right below the knee so they can't bend in.
Wow.
And I would say about like 23 hours out of the day was spent like this. So it really changed how I had to get around, how I had to move. It also kind of changed my body over type with the way my back, I had my back issues from kind of sitting and hunched like this a lot. The main thing was just getting around. The braces weighed almost as much as I did, so my mom couldn't carry me. Getting around was constantly moving and adjusting and trying to find ways to adapt and fit through shapes, shape shifting. Going through a basic door, my legs were too wide. So I would have to kind of shift out, lay on my side, and then kind of fold my way through and do this whole Tetris kind of motion and go through. The only time I was allowed to have the braces off were for like an hour to clean, bathe, and I wasn't allowed to walk around. So I had to stay put on the ground. And I was in these probably from about 3 to 7 years old, almost 4 years. So I grew up in them and had to learn how to walk with them, had to learn how to adjust. Walking, trying to walk with them was very difficult because you had to kind of like shift, and it was tough. So moving around the ground was a lot easier. And I'll never forget like my first jiu-jitsu class, and we were doing these drills, and they showed these like hip escapes and butt scoots and all of them. You gotta be kidding me, really? But I was like, oh, paradise. So it was like, it was really interesting. Like as a kid, you go through these things, and why is this happening to me? Kind of mentality and emotional things. And I'm not very religious, and I know there's a lot of different philosophies and different views on religion. And one of those things is God works in mysterious ways, and it's such a open answer that it's like, all right, well, that's not helping me get through what I'm going through mentally right now. As a kid, it really didn't mentally affect me. It was more just kind of adapting and moving along and surviving. I didn't like people doing things for me. So getting around, I would have ways to do that. I would have a backpack, so I would shuffle my way out, go into the kitchen, pull myself up with a harness that my mom kind of strapped to the wall, and we would keep like my snacks on the bottom shelf, everything that I was going to take, and then the whole process would take me maybe 25 minutes just to get the juice. But I was doing it on my own, and that I felt better mentally about it. I'd have to ask people to get ice cream for me because there's no way I was making it back without it melting. So that that I would have to be realistic with. But I wanted to be able to figure these things out, and I didn't like people helping me, and I don't know, I just didn't feel like somebody was always going to help me. It really didn't mentally hit me until teenage years. When I got out of the braces, I still had this gap of medical problems. I had all these resulting things happening from the surgeries that were just causing other issues. And I no longer looked handicapped. I look like a normal kid now without the braces, but I had all these issues. So I couldn't take regular gym classes, I couldn't participate in sports. I have a shunt placed in my spinal cord, so technically I'm not supposed to do any full contact sport. But reality is I could be in a car accident and the jolt could shift it out. So not playing sports, always wanting to. Gym classes, I had to always be sitting out. And unfortunately, we kind of grew up in an era where chauvinistic males existed heavily. And they make fun of you in a way, like, oh, stop being a sissy. And sometimes they use other harsh words that are politically not correct anymore, or maybe never were, but that's what was used. And, now you're feeling the emotional effect of it. And that's when it kind of starts setting in mentally. And, teenage years were really tough because I had all these major surgeries from 3 to about 25, maybe 9 surgeries.
Wow.
On my back. I had a bladder augmentation. I had a couple knee surgeries. I had a thing done on my heart. So it was like all these other things that kept coming back around. But it was the second knee surgery that really, I was 16. And now you're being introduced to all these hard drugs that are happening. You have all that testosterone and puberty vibes just melting around and getting ready to combust, plus all this other stuff that I was dealing with. And I mentally broke. I did. I spent a lot of those years trying to figure out how to deal with my life, and it was tough. And I'm very grateful that I made it out of there alive, because there's a couple times where it was not looking good. And having that anger and that just resentment toward my situation was like really just holding me down from progressing in life, and it mentally broke me. Wow. Hearing the second knee surgery, I had a brace put back on for my knee, and hearing that term brace, that was the only thing we were concerned about is, look, I don't want to brace, and when I woke up out of surgery and the brace was on, I broke down in tears, and it just mentally broke me that this being back into that, I've had to learn how to walk, I think 4 times already.
Wow.
And it just,
incredible.
Yeah, it was just hearing that term, you felt like these chains were off you, and then now you're being brought back down.
Yeah.
And, getting into martial arts, it was actually when I was a teenager, I started getting into fights. Not on purpose, not intentionally, but I started defending myself. I was being bullied a lot, and I got tired of hearing it.
Yeah.
And I started reacting back.
Yeah.
So it became to a point where, even if you started looking at me, I'm throwing first now, because I'm not even giving you a chance. And I was fragile. I was breaking bones, fracturing things, just falling, because I didn't have time to start developing muscles.
Yeah.
Because you figure, by the time you're 8, 9 years old, you've had your legs for 8, 9 years. I've only had them for a year.
Right.
So my muscles were still developing, and if I fell, I'd fracture something real quick.
Wow.
I fractured something in my leg, and I walked on it for 8 days before I even knew.
Wow.
But that's also because I don't have a lot of feeling in my legs, so pros and cons to that. Pro, when we clock shins, it doesn't bother me, but I could also have damage and not know it. But going through all that and getting into that aggressive stage, it was tough. So I realized, hey man, I gotta learn how to defend myself. Convinced my mom to let me start doing Taekwondo, and I was doing it, but then the second knee surgery happened, and I just mentally broke. And from 16 to almost 18, those were very dangerous years of my life. And having my kid young was a nice eye opener, and it brought me back to martial arts, because I was like, I need to find a hobby. And I was doing it as an exercise, as a form of therapy. With jiu-jitsu, for us, it's not a martial arts, it's not a lifestyle. I really feel it's a form of combative therapy.
Yeah.
We're getting a chance to actually get these aggression, this testosterone, our just daily just nastiness out in a healthy environment. You take somebody who's too aggressive, you kind of tone them down a little bit. They relax. And then you get that person who's just, they're so passive, they're afraid to go for the goal. And then you teach them a little bit of jiu-jitsu, and they learn, okay, I got to be a little more aggressive in a positive way. I had a student who I said, come on man, be a little more aggressive. He thought it was angry. And I'm like, no, they're two different things.
Yeah.
But you get the polar opposites sometimes, and it really helps you find that healthy balance of when do we push, when do we give, how much energy should I invest in it? And it was just, I wish it would have came into my life earlier.
Yeah.
But things happen the way they did.
When it's supposed to. Sometimes the student has to be ready.
Yeah, and maybe I wasn't ready. I know for a long time, I was very unhappy with my own life and my own personal story.
Yeah.
That I was ashamed of talking about it. I never talked about it to anybody. I actually lost friends because I didn't like them talking about my health issues.
Yeah.
Like one of the side effects of the surgery that should have never happened is I have to be catheterized for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
So when I have to urinate, I have to self-cath.
Mm-hmm.
And that I was not born like that. That
Yeah.
is because this doctor chose some very bad things in life and then messed my surgery up. And that's something that happened to that. And for the longest time, I was very ashamed of it, very embarrassed. I wouldn't talk to anybody about it. I wouldn't even have a conversation. And I lost a friend one time because he told a girl that I liked about it. And I was just mortified.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you hear the whispers and things like that. And it's just, kids are cruel.
Yeah.
And they don't realize how, when they don't know something, how easy it is to upset and offend. But you kind of create this shell and this layer and this control over it. And, you know, sometimes it was healthy and sometimes it wasn't.
It's a powerful story, and it's like you hear this and you're like, well, how is this dude doing jiu-jitsu? Like, I don't understand. Like, you had 9 surgeries and you had all of these challenges. Like, how is he possibly doing jiu-jitsu? And then I remind myself, wow, jiu-jitsu, I've always said, is like the most adaptable martial art. Like, jiu-jitsu will take you as you are.
Yeah.
As long as you have limbs, like, you can do jiu-jitsu.
Hey man, there's guys out there without limbs.
Yeah, I see that, like that Kyle Major.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking about. And it's just like, I'm just grateful I have mine.
Yeah.
You know?
So how has that affected jiu-jitsu for you? Like, what adaptations have you had to make because of
a lot
these challenges?
A lot.
Yeah.
So just going into it, a lot of guys, they don't get to this mindset until they've been in jiu-jitsu for a while and then they get an injury. They were a healthy specimen, maybe like a prime athlete, you know, always winning competitions, and then all of a sudden they get a knee injury, and now things change. The mental attack that hits too, not even talking about that, not being able to do something you love starts mentally beating you up and depression sets in.
Yeah.
That's something that most people won't talk about with that, is like, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's why I tell my guys, like, when you get injured, like, look, don't stay out of the gym, but limit to what you're going to do, be realistic. So for me, with what I was faced with, I was always testing my boundaries, and there's plenty of times I got hurt doing that. I was constantly on crutches because I wanted to see how far of a cliff I could jump off. And even to this day, like, I don't know, it's we were talking about yesterday, if we go somewhere where there's a cliff to jump off in the water, I'm gonna probably do it.
Yeah.
You know, so I test those limitations, but I also have to be realistic. So going into them, like, I know physically my legs will not stretch any further than this. No matter how much I stretch, this is a realistic limitation.
Yeah.
I have to be real with myself. I'm not gonna ever Van Damme it. But when I'm in this position, and just like when we were playing that game and how we were playing, it's one of the reasons why that position becomes so comfortable to me, because I've been here for so long and I've already had to figure out the mechanics of counterbalance.
Like you were in braces, but you were like literally sitting in guard for years. And it's interesting how your life can align that somehow. Right? Like you have this amazing guard and this amazing game of jiu-jitsu that
adapted to
in a pretty traumatic experience
but
that anybody else would have said, I don't even want to live.
Not everybody, but I mean, some people do, and you know, I feel sorry for those people. It's not easy to find the drive and the motivation to do this, and there's days like I mentally don't want to do today. Like, it's beating me up, but then again, like we talked earlier, is I just start my routine and I go on autopilot, and then mentally I pick back in, and then I'm like, fuck man, like, yeah, it was pretty cool.
And thank you for doing that, because you're doing that and now hearing this story too, like, really gives light and inspiration to everyone else too, you know, because it's like we all are gonna have days where we're dragging our bags to the gym, or we're sitting at home, or I don't want to get up, or I don't want to do this, or I'm tired, or I had a rough day, and then we have to start looking at them as reasons and excuses, start defining those things, because it's easy to make excuses. And then we hear your story and it's like, man, like, dude, that's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing.
It's also, I really do appreciate that. Thank you. It's one of those things where I forget about it and I just kind of work with what I have. And we were talking about it with the seminar last night about, sometimes you're injured and I can't play a certain thing. I hurt my hands out of work one time, or doing side work, landscaping, and crushed my finger.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a hand for like a year almost, where I didn't have a grip. I completely crushed my finger, and I had to get that strength back, and it took a long time. So I didn't have chokes to work on, so arm bars.
Yeah.
And then there was a time where I hurt my knee, so I'm like,
So
all right,
it's the upper body.
yeah, now I'm working my chokes.
And I've had those similar experiences where, like, you know, the shoulders are on, you know, rest,
Yeah,
so
man.
it's the legs, the guard's working, or the legs are on rest, so now I'm going to go into cross-collar chokes for a while, or work some cool, you know, chokes or something like that.
But there's also the biggest thing that I've had to learn with my personal story with myself is it's not, I can't compare it to your story. Your story is your story, because the worst thing you experience is the worst thing you experience.
Yeah.
The worst thing I did is my thing. And that was something that was really tough for me with my kids growing up, like working with them, is like, oh, well, when I was this, I had to go through this. And it's like, you broke your finger. And
Yeah.
okay, well, cool, I've had surgeries. And then it's like, well, that's the worst pain he's ever felt so far in his life. To them, it is this. It's just like, listen, I know it's bad, but it could always be worse. Sometimes that's really difficult to hear in the moment, but I'm telling you, it's important to have that perspective and at least say it and lie to yourself over and over again until it becomes a belief.
Yeah.
That, man, okay, cool, yeah, I was in these braces, but I could still be in them, and I'm not, and I'm very grateful for it. I do have to really adapt my jiu-jitsu to it, because there's things that I physically can't do. Now, I do test that boundary, and then once I see that limitation's real, I respect it.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've been hurting is my vertebrae in my back, and I shift and rotate. If I go a certain too far of an extension, I'll start shifting things out of place. And now I know, okay, this is my limitation. Same thing with like an arm bar.
Yeah.
You know how far your arm can go straight before you're like, oh, okay. Instead of like waiting until it's like, oh man, I should have tapped like 5 seconds.
For us to honor those perfect constraints that
Our egos get in the way.
that our individual bodies offer us, because we're all built and shaped differently. And if we didn't have any constraints, if our arms didn't have a joint that locked, right? Like we wouldn't be able to do joint locks, and we wouldn't be able to do chokes. And so it offers us these perfect constraints, and no matter where we are physically in our body or where we're starting from, you know, we can still train and we can still do jiu-jitsu, and you know, this guy's an inspiration. So like,
But also look at how
awesome.
Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was kind of modified with Elio Gracie, and I'm nowhere in any way trying to even compare myself, but his story is an inspiration to me, because if you know it, he wasn't able to train. He had health issues, watch what was going on, and then realize like, hey, we're gonna adapt this.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh man, like that's a very awesome story, because it's very similar. I wasn't allowed to train, but you have to take a different mental approach, and you have to be a little more strategic. There's a lot of cerebral, fighting going on here. And we were talking about it, it's such a what if moment that it's changing second by second, millisecond, you know?
We call it the gentle art, but it's really, truly, as we've learned from Steve, the art of adaptation.
Yeah, it gets gentle after you learn how to do it. They don't tell you the rough process to get there, though.
But going through that process
it's worth it.
Definitely worth it.
It was
It's definitely worth it, man.
Hey, man,
awesome job. Thank you so much. Check out Steve on social media. He's got a lot of great stuff that he's always putting out, and what an inspiration to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.